Okay, for our true crime aficionados, you remember Jimmy Rogers, right? Well, he was convicted of second-degree murder involved in a plot to kill Teresa Sievers out there in Florida in a brutal way, hammered to death. There's a picture of that beautiful lady right there. Well, it's not the end of this case because, as you guys may recall, the husband, Mark Sievers, is on trial for having asked his friend, who solicited the help of another individual, to commit this murder. And if you may recall, during the Jimmy Rogers case, something had gone awry. He had kicked over a dog bowl when they were trying to commit the murder, alerted the attention of the victim, and it became a really chaotic and horrible crime scene when they killed Teresa Sievers. So we have the honor of having Jaclyn Bevis with us. She is from NBC2 out there in Fort Myers. Jaclyn covered the entire Jimmy Rogers trial, and now she's covering the entire trial here for Mark Sievers. But Jaclyn, first, welcome to the show, and tell me what's going on with jury selection.
Jury selection is taking quite some time, which we did expect. We're in the 5th day of jury selection. There's still death penalty qualifying potential jurors. The judge is hoping to keep as many as possible. He said earlier this morning, though, that he was hoping for general voir dire to start as early as tomorrow. So he's really crossing his fingers that he'll have between 40 and 45 potential jurors going into tomorrow to do those general voir dire questions and then pick a jury of 12 with 2 alternates. Voir
dire, I love it, I love it. So Jaclyn, having tried death penalty cases as a prosecutor, know that at this critical stage, just so our audience understands, when you're looking to get that death qualified jury, they essentially have to say that they would follow the law and impose the death penalty should the aggravating factors be established sufficiently enough in their mind. But also, they have to balance that out with making sure that they be fair and listening to mitigating factors. So tell me, out there in Fort Myers, what kind of jury pool are we looking at? Is it a real heavy death penalty place, or is it hard to find jurors that would impose the death penalty?
I would say it has not been that difficult to find. We've probably lost about 15% of people to that issue. We've lost 2 so far today. One of them occurred at a sidebar conversation, so we're not exactly sure what the reasoning is behind that one was. But the judge has been very specific, and he's done even some of the questioning at the end, making sure that the potential jurors understand not just the questions coming from the state and the defense, but understand that simply here will be the law. This is what you will be defined as what you have to follow, and you have to follow it to a T, and you have to listen to both sides and then balance it. And the judge asking those questions, I think, has helped a little bit to get those very direct answers from potential jurors.
Well, Jaclyn, you followed from gavel to gavel, like we do the coverage here, the Jimmy Rogers case. Now, this is the husband who is now Mark Sievers on trial. I was always wondering about this. Maybe you can give me some insight because you've been there throughout. Why did the prosecution make a decision to go with Jimmy Rogers first as opposed to the husband? Do you have any insight on that?
I do not believe that was a prosecution decision. In the state of Florida, typically they do trials based on timelines. And based on the setup of this, Jimmy Rogers and Curtis Wright, the co-defendant that took the plea deal, were both arrested far earlier than Mark Sievers. They both had cases that began in August of the year that Teresa Sievers was killed. Mark Sievers was not arrested until the following February when Curtis Wright took his plea deal. So because of that, just in and of itself, the Jimmy Rogers trial goes first based on the fact that he had been in custody longer.
You know, I get that with the timeline. I've been involved and faced that myself in co-defendant murder cases, but the judges used to kind of defer to us if we said we want to start one versus the other for purposes of our prosecution. Nevertheless, Jimmy Rogers was convicted. Do you expect that the evidence in this case with Mark Sievers is going to be substantially the same, or do you see some curveballs here?
It'll be a bit different, I would assume. We're still unsure, and maybe you'd have a better answer to this than I would. The witness testimony of Taylor Showmaker, who was Jimmy Ray Rogers' girlfriend at the time of this murder, her witness testimony may not even come into play at all. A lot of what she said was things that Jimmy had told her and admissions that she said Jimmy had made in regards to this case. So I'm not sure if most of what she has to say would be admissible. I do know we'll see a lot more business records and things of that nature when it comes to Mark Sievers, because of course there's no allegation that he was ever even there when this crime happened. All of this is about planning. Of course, it also brings in burner phones and that discussion as well. So I assume we'll see a little tweak of the evidence. Probably not many tweaks, though, to witness testimony.
So I know that it's a fool's errand to prognosticate what could happen at the end of a case before we've even started trying the case. But nevertheless, we're in the media, so this is what we do. Based upon what you saw there in the first trial, is this case in any way in your mind weaker, stronger, or just about the same?
It'll be very similar, but with Jimmy Rogers' case, they did convict him of second-degree murder. They did not convict him of first-degree murder. That tells us that, and they did not convict him of conspiracy. They also did not convict him of the burglary, only trespassing. So that tells me that the jury, when they listened to Curtis Wainwright, the co-defendant that took the plea deal, they did believe everything that he said. This will really be very, very similar. The state is very much so leaning on the testimony of Curtis Wainwright and what he says on the witness stand and how believable he is to these jurors. That will be the only thing when you come to this case. That's the smoking gun is Curtis Wainwright. So if the jury does not believe what he says on the witness stand, then there's no chance of a guilty verdict, I don't think. It'll also depend, too, we haven't heard much about what the defense will be putting on. And the defense did not put on much of a defense in the Jimmy Ray Rogers trial. Yeah,
and the Curtis Wainwright issue is even further exacerbated for the prosecution because there's a lengthy transcript, and we all know that witnesses will testify differently. And you indicated from your review of the Rogers case that the jury didn't buy everything he said, so he could be compromised even more in this case with the use of those transcripts, no?
That is always a potential, and again, you know that better than I do, but the story that he tells of what happened that night, and I know Jimmy Rogers' team of attorneys really focused in on the fact that Wright's story changed throughout this process until he ended up on the story that he shared with the jurors in that case. So he'll have to be pretty exact on what he shares in this case to ensure that the defense attorneys for Mark Sievers don't really hang on to that and any changes that he might make to his testimony.
Jaclyn, it sounds like the pivotal part of that trial that we'll watch with great acuity is the cross-examination of Mr. Wright at trial, because that is, based on what you're telling us, going to be a pivotal moment. Jaclyn Bevis out there at WBBH in Fort Myers covering the Jimmy Rogers case from beginning to end, as well as the new trial, Mark Sievers. Thank you so much, Jaclyn.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And guys, listen, we're going to take, like I said, we got a lot going on here. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back on the other side. Stay with us.